Turn your great idea into reality with Squarespace. Squarespace makes it easier than ever to launch your passion project, whether you're showcasing your work or selling products of any kind. With beautiful templates and the ability to customize just about anything, you can easily make a beautiful website all by yourself. And if you do get stuck, Squarespace's 24/7 award-winning customer support is there to help. Head to squarespace.com/MU for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use the offer code MU to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
Welcome to Mysterious Universe, Season 21, Episode 24. Coming up on the show, we've got the Sons of Biame, the Orang Baby Snatchers, and the Wisdom of the Nebasaurs. I'm Benjamin Grundy. Joining me is Aaron Wright.
I'm not so sure it's wisdom. Those Nebasaurs, you can't trust them. You know, they're a little bit shifty.
Really?
Shady characters.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think you can trust them at all.
You're saying it's some kind of Nebasaurus trick?
They control the financial system.
They do.
They're dangerous. You're just going to stay right away from them.
We'll be hearing from one of the Nebasaurs later and what went on their home planet.
But Ben, this is our last show.
Last show of the season.
Oh, well, and also our last show in Sydney.
It is our last show in Sydney. The studio is a complete mess right now.
It's like a tsunami literally has come through here.
Wow, there's no furniture, so we've just been sitting on the floor Japanese style doing our research. There's no desks. All our books are gone. Everything's packed up. We're out of here.
That's it. We're gone. Getting out of Sydney. But it's actually really good news because you and I have decided after almost 10 years in Sydney, well, it is 10 years in Sydney, that it's time to get the hell out. Love Sydney. Beautiful city. Come and visit it whenever you get a chance. But
love it.
Overpopulated and expensive.
I love the 400,000 new people that come every year.
Yeah, and the $1 million average median house price. And,
it's brilliant.
Oh, yeah, it's so fantastic.
My favourite thing is when I want to travel 10 kilometres on the weekend and it takes nearly 2 hours. I love that.
Yeah. And look, I think it's fine when you're young and you've only just gotten married, but once you've got kids and everything and you got to start driving them to sport and stuff and...
Well, we just thought, we've been doing this show for a long time and it's going really well and we don't need to be in this city. Mm-hmm. We could do it from really anywhere in the world. So we've decided to move to a northern state here in Australia, to Queensland. We're going to the Sunshine Coast, a beautiful place. And
despite the fact you don't like sand, but apart from that, you'll be fine.
Yeah. Well, since this is such a big move, we've been working on this behind the scenes for months now, trying to plan everything. We're moving, obviously, both our families,
our homes, the office,
and the business. We're building a brand new studio. All fingers and toes crossed. It'll be ready by next week when we get into our new warehouse.
We're building it in a shipping container.
Yeah, and it sounds crappy when you say it, but it looks amazing.
It looks amazing. We will put some photos up on the Facebook page and maybe tweet something out once we've done it. So, yeah, it's going to go very nicely.
Yeah, they look beautiful. There's a guy up there who just happens to be running a business right where we're moving, and that's his whole thing. He builds recording studios in shipping containers. So it's all custom made. Everyone he builds is better than the last one. Mm-hmm. Looking forward to getting in there. And it's just going to be a massive change for us to get out of the city.
This city's killing me. Honestly, it's just... As I said, I love Sydney, but it has just become so, we do all these stories on the show, Ben, about, noise and, these things.
Being in nature.
Being in nature. There's just almost no nature. I live next to a train line. I've got constant cars driving past my place. It's been like this for 10 years. And there comes a point where you go, you know what? What's the point? Why push yourself so hard when you can actually be in a location where you've got fresh air, plenty of trees, plenty of sporting activities. That's what I want.
Yeah, so can't wait. Looking forward to it. We're as soon as we finish this recording, we're basically packing everything up that's left here, jumping in our cars and driving and going.
Yep.
Yeah. How's your packing go? Have you got everything packed?
Oh, God, no. Again, at home, it looks like a tsunami's been through there. Yeah. It's both. It's basically the whole place has been ripped apart.
So when we were booking everything, I paid extra to have people come and pack all my stuff up for me.
I'm not doing that. I don't want people to go through my stuff.
Now you're regretting it, aren't you?
I really regret it.
So I'm having a team of little Japanese ladies come
Marie Kondos
and just individually wrap every single item. Like every knife and fork will be wrapped in tatami paper or something.
Does this buck join?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. Throw it out.
So it's kind of breezy for me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes. I've just kind of thrown everything into boxes and all ready to shove it into the truck.
Yeah.
That will work.
Although moving our library has been the most difficult thing.
Oh, I didn't realize how big our library was, but it makes sense after so long. Yeah.
Thousands of books have to be moved, and I don't think they're going to fit in our containers for shipping. So we're just going to have to send them one by one.
Yes. But hopefully our schedule shouldn't be affected too much. And of course, this is the last episode of the season. So we're taking a week-long break as well, which won't be a break. It's going to be a break for you guys. So when are we coming back, Ben?
We're back for the start of season 20 of Plus on July the 2nd. And we're back for the start of the season 22 for MU on July the 5th.
Excellent.
So, yeah, we're just taking a week off as usual, and hopefully everything will be ready. If the first recording is in our basement somewhere and it sounds really weird, that's because our studio hasn't been fully completed. But we expect it to be ready on time.
It should be, yes. But this show is going to be a little bit different because recently you and I, Ben, went into the far reaches of Cantong. And when I say that, we went to Burwood, which is a very Asian area. And we went over there. And when we went in, we went to this, basically what appeared to be a Chinese restaurant.
Yeah, so I saw an email a couple of months ago advertising the world exclusive from Stephen and Evan Strong. And of course, Stephen and Evan Strong, we've featured on the show before. They've come on as guests. They're great guys. And they've done incredible research on the true history of Aboriginal people in Australia.
And also debunking the out of Africa theory.
They claim that out of Africa is completely done. It's not true at all that humans came out of Africa, and the science behind that is essentially widely recognized by academics, but it's not something that's understood by, the mainstream. You don't get taught this stuff in schools. They're really good at getting that information across. And they came out that they had this world exclusive of a new skull. Now, this was being organised by UFO New South Wales. I'll just read you some of their email. They said, Stephen and Evan have been researching some very unusual skulls from around Australia. They coined these skulls the no-forehead beings. So obviously not related to David Wilcock in any way.
The complete reverse.
Due to the lack of a forehead in the skulls also have an elongated head and very large eye sockets. Having had a reconstruction made, they are now ready to have it displayed publicly. World exclusive! This is the first time the reconstructed skull will be on display, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, Stephen and Evan, they've co-authored 5 books together. Constructing a New World Map was one. Mary Magdalene's Dreaming, which we've never covered.
I haven't heard of that one.
But we have gone into Deeply Forgotten Origin out of Australia, and the new one is Between a Rock and a Hard Place. Evan is the son, the younger guy, does most of the research by the sounds of it. And Stephen, his father, is now a retired school teacher, but he's a really good presenter, really good talker, and he's really up on stage doing the delivery side of things.
Well, he's also out at the sites as well, if he can get to them, if he's allowed into these sites, because he does claim that he's being blocked by government authorities and, other powers that be from getting into these sites. But when he can, he's actually very much on the ground getting out there.
Yeah, and after I saw that email, I thought we've got to go. We booked in to go and see this event. I was reading a little bit more information from the Strongs. They said the skulls we are researching throughout Australia are utterly unique. Even the government officials have stopped fighting our research, as they know with the full reconstruction of a skull complete, this is no less than a new species. They claim they are actively helping, but we will see. So there's a bit of a conspiracy side to this, that the evil Australian government is trying to cover up this. And that's a huge claim, that there's a new species of hominid about to be revealed.
Well, not only that, he's claiming that the government authorities have threatened him with arrest if he persists in releasing this information.
Yeah, so we went on June the 1st. The event was back then, but we've decided, well, let me just say that after about 10 minutes in, you and I realised, we've got to hang on to this for the last show of the season.
Yes.
So this is going to be a different show. We're just going to riff off what we essentially saw back then. We've got all these notes on
pages and pages of notes.
Rejig our memory. And for our Plus extension, what's coming up in Plus?
Oh, this is great. So in our Plus extension, when we were recently talking about the Burbalangs, those strange supernatural creatures, I wanted to look into more details about them because I thought, okay, well, if you've got this, small isolated island off the coast of Malaysia, there must be other, pieces of folklore or other, researchers that might have come across something similar. And it turns out that Borneo and Indonesia and, obviously Borneo is part of Indonesia, but Borneo and those regions in the Malay Peninsula have a huge wealth of stories about these similar types of supernatural creatures. And it almost fits into this parallel of being almost like Indochina fairy folklore, which parallels
They were very
British folklore.
similar to vampires, the Berbalangs.
Yes, very similar, such as, the use of garlic with vampires. With the Berbalangs, it was the use of lime juice. You sprinkle stuff with lime juice to reveal it. Well, I found many more stories of where, essentially, the stories of the changelings, about how the fae folk will come in and try and snatch a baby.
Yeah.
The exact same thing was happening allegedly in Indonesia and these similar locations where these creatures were showing up and swapping out babies. And there's all these cases of where people have come back after treading into their realm, which leads to this kind of interdimensional kind of idea. And then I'm going to go into some strange reports of people that have had encounters with imaginary friends. And then I'm going to finish up the end of the Plus show with a story about a very, very strange story about a plane crash that happened that resulted in a mass explosion of hauntings after the crash. Things like, people showing up at people's doorsteps looking for their luggage, but then, but then disappearing because they're actually victims of the aircraft crash. So very, very dark, unusual stuff. That's all coming up in our Plus extension at the end of the show.
Looking forward to that. Well, let's go into this event, Stephen and Evan Strong. So, as you said earlier, it was at perhaps one of Sydney's most prestige suburbs, Burwood, a.k.a. Beirut Wood.
Pretty much.
A.k.a. Burwood. And you immediately feel enriched by diversity when you're there. Like, you just feel...
What diversity? That's not, I was like you and I are the only white guys there.
No, that's diversity. when you're the only white person, that's diversity, Aaron. There's nothing like getting yelled at in Arabic while simultaneously being pushed from behind by an old Chinese lady. That is just the beauty of this wonderful place.
That does sum up how it feels.
So we walked very briskly through the third world gauntlet to our destination.
Well, this is the thing. Like, don't get me wrong, it's also a pretty, I don't know, it feels like it's a scummy area. I feel bad.
How dare you say that?
Like, I know that I live on the North Shore of Sydney, but it's just a scummy, rundown area. Not the people. I'm just saying the area itself. It's just like, what? Am I going to get mugged?
Well, all we knew was that it was at Club Burwood. We'd never been to Club Burwood. We're just like, this club should at least give us some sanctuary from the wonderful, enriching place of Burwood. So we arrive, and as you said, it's literally a Chinese restaurant. And it's not even a good Chinese restaurant. It looks like the shittiest food court.
Awful. Yes.
Low rent, disgusting place. Like, they maybe clean it once every 6 months, and there's no like fresh cooked food. It's just like food in buckets.
Yeah, pretty much.
And you just go up and fill your plate from the buckets, and that's Club Burwood. And the talk was being given in a room above this really shitty Chinese restaurant.
The smell was wafting up through.
Yeah.
And then I sit down because there's no seats. Like, this is the thing. The place was actually packed. There were, plenty of people attending this presentation.
Yeah.
But I sit down next to a woman who was stuffing bourbons and cokes, stinks of cigarettes, and is like, oh, just hang on to that for me while she goes outside for a cigarette. And it turns out to be someone who used to be very high up in MUFON.
Oh, yeah.
I was like,
she was the MUFON director of Australia for 30 years or something. And she's just smashing back these bourbons. By the end, she's smashing bourbons and hoeing into this cheesecake next to Aaron. It was so funny. And even while the presenters, while Stephen Strong's talking, she didn't care. She's just like, oh, yeah, that's right, honey. I know all about this. So anyway, we get there, Stephen, and let me just say that UFO New South Wales, they put on great events.
Oh, they always do. Yeah, Jamie's brilliant.
The Jamie from Moon Mason runs
wife.
it. They're really fantastic. They do an excellent job. We make fun of the cheap location and everything, but they have to do that because
that's part of the fun.
There's a small group and there's no money involved. They do it because they love it.
Yeah,
and they do a really good job. So Stephen, of course, came on the stage and he started with this announcement that a new species has been found in Australia that will rewrite history. Full stop. He claimed that the government is now supporting them because, as I said earlier, they realized that Stephen and Evan had done a reconstruction on the skull. So there was now no doubt that it was some kind of new species. So then he starts going into how out of Africa is absolutely wrong. And this is what I love about these guys. They're very good at taking the latest in scientific developments, the latest in DNA and archaeological research, and showing how our common understanding, our mainstream understanding of human history and evolution is dead wrong.
It is wrong, yeah.
And out of Africa is finished. It's wrong. And it's not claims that they're making. Like I said, they just take the latest cutting-edge research, the latest DNA work, the latest archaeological work, and they demonstrate what it actually means. So I wanted to go into this in a little bit more detail because, again, I think this is where they're really strong, these guys. No pun intended.
Yeah.
Their latest book, Between a Rock and a Hard Place, The Out of Australia Theory, I think we've touched on their earlier ones, which were building this idea. But this one really focuses on a lot of the science behind why out of Africa is wrong and why they believe it's actually out of Australia.
So this is something that's really important to point out. So is it that mainstream science has now accepted that out of Africa is wrong? Yes. And they have no answers for it whatsoever. But the difference where Evan and Stephen step in is that they think that they have an answer.
That's correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's correct. So from the book, they wrote that an article appeared in the New York Times in September the 22nd, 2012. It was written by Nicholas Wade. And he stated that a lock of hair collected by a British anthropologist a century ago has yielded the first genome of an Australian Aborigine. Now, the Strongs say in the simplest terms, with the genomes of all four races now fully recorded, the numbers are now crunched, some basic observations can now be made, and the timeline of human history can be reshuffled. So the two youngest races, according to this genome work, are European and Asian races. Now, the timing of those races is around 40,000 years old. That's our current understanding. But when you go further back from that, they point out that it starts to get awkward. So our previous understanding of Native Australians is that they separated from their African kin some 75,000 years ago. And once they left their home base of Africa, they spent a lot of time in transit. It was something like 25,000 years. They did something for 25,000 years and then finally settled in Australia. So one of the first things they question in the book is, what did they do for 25,000 years?
Yeah, they have to settle somewhere.
What? Were they just on a boat? What were they doing? So this is already a problem. Again, the timeline is that these original people came to Australia 50,000 years ago. Now, the reason this is a problem is because there's already at least 11 sites that are confirmed, that have been studied, that have solid archaeological work done on them, again, by mainstream archaeologists, that reveal this date can't be true. It has to be older. So, for example, Lake Mango, wherever that is in Australia, they've found cremated bones that are 60,000 years old. So it's already older than 50,000 years.
Yes, it's already pushing it back.
They've found a complete skeleton there that's 65,000 years old. You can go to Point Ritchie, where they've found shell middens, which are early tools used. They're 80,000 years old. You can go to Lake George, where they've found fire stick farming. That's 120,000 years old. And it just keeps going back older and older and older. The oldest known occupied location we have in Australia is from the Great Barrier Reef in Queensland, where they have evidence of fire stick farming, this very primitive way of farming. 185,000 years old, that site.
Wow. So that goes far beyond what the mainstream accepted idea is of how long the Aboriginal Australians have been here.
It goes back before there was even meant to be people leaving Africa. So it doesn't make sense. You know, obviously this has to be incorrect, this understanding. Now, they say when you look at the mtDNA, there's virtually nothing linking Aboriginal Australians to Africans. And he goes on to quote researcher Keith Windshuttle, who states that 50 years of blood genetic research has failed to provide any clue to Australian Aboriginal origins. He says, may I state here and now that our extensive blood grouping survey over 3 decades have produced no genetic evidence that the Negro ever entered the Pacific. There's no evidence at all of that.
That was also backed up, I remember in the talk, because I know you're reading from the book there, but I remember in the talk he also mentioned the Y chromosome mapping. And obviously you don't get much information out of Y chromosomes, but there was a Russian study called the Walkthrough. And what this did was compare 400 African haplotypes. And they didn't get regardless of what that is, they didn't get a single match between Africa and Europe. But the central point was Australia.
Yeah.
So it indicated from that data that everything came out of Australia in itself.
I think I've actually got that highlighted here. The work was compiled by Anatoly Kliosov.
Yes, that's it.
And Igor Rodzynansky from the Academy of DNA Genealogy it's actually in America. It was in Newton, USA. Their research determined that a more plausible interpretation might have been that both current Africans and non-Africans descended separately from a more common ancestor, thus forming a proverbial fork. A region where this downstream ancestor arose would not necessarily be Africa. In fact, it was never proven that he lived in Africa. So the Strongs say that this latest research, these academics, the scientists, they're actually saying the same thing that they're saying, that they're claiming. Nothing has ever been proven. And as the research and techniques used in genetics have become more refined, Africa's prominence has actually eroded. It's becoming less and less likely that out of Africa is the true origin of human beings.
It's fascinating, though, as to whether or not the mainstream, especially media outlets, are willing to entertain this, because Stephen did point out that there was a mitochondrial study between these tribes as well that revealed the similar types of information, that Africa really is degrading in regards to being the point of origin for Homo sapiens sapiens. But he said that there's a magazine here, a science magazine called Cosmos magazine. And I must say, it's extremely stuffy-nosed and skeptical from whenever I've read it.
Yeah.
But one of the journalists was Jackie Hayes. And she wrote an article about this. And she was actually very level-headed and just discussing it. She got fired. Now, whether or not Stephen's claiming that she got fired because of writing the article, but there could be other reasons why she got fired.
Yeah, it's a little bit misleading for him to say that, because we have no idea why. Did she even get fired? Maybe they just didn't have a position for it. We don't know any details.
Yeah, exactly. But the point is, she stopped working for them soon after that article was published, which suggests that, well, was there a link there? Is there something going on?
Yeah, they also mention, speaking of the Y chromosome work, there's the data obtained from this international project conducted by Family Tree DNA, which is based in Texas and Arizona. And the Strongs point out that what they found was that, quote, not one non-African participant out of more than 400 individuals of the project tested positive to any of the 13 African subclades of haplogroup A. So they just, again, as you mentioned earlier from the other study, there was nothing linking these non-Africans to African history, like African movement out of Africa hundreds of thousands of years ago.
Now, I don't recall him going into too much detail about it, but he did mention the Mount Toba eruption, and he was talking about the fact that around 75,000 years ago, the reason why we might have this different understanding as to where life sprung up is because there was a massive catastrophe that essentially wiped the world back to a population of around 5,000 people, with two population centres, one being in Europe and one being in South Africa. And that's where we're getting this idea that it started from Africa and has moved through. Did he go into any more detail in the book about that calamity?
It's mentioned. I mean, it's obviously not their research. We know that Mount Toba happened, and it's considered the most destructive world disaster in the last 2 million years.
Well, there was a metre of ash in Greenland, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, everywhere in the world was basically covered in ash, apart from, as you said, I didn't know parts of Europe weren't affected.
He said Europe and South Africa were the only two regions that were unaffected, which is strange.
Are you sure you wrote that down? Because it was Australia. Australia was the region that wasn't affected.
Oh, I apologise. Maybe it was Australia.
And that's
sorry,
why,
you're saying Europe was wiped out. My apologies.
Yeah, that's why they think that out of Australia kind of fits into this history of the Mount Toba eruption, because either, there were already people in Australia during the eruption and they survived, and even if they had a developed culture and technology, that survived as well.
I'm sorry, I had the sound of a fork and cheesecake in my ears. So.
I know all this, honey. Can you get me another bourbon? She was quite lovely. So Mount Toba is an issue because this eruption was 75,000 years ago. as you said, the global population reduced to 10,000 people or something, the researchers claim. And yeah, the only place not affected is Australia. So we're supposed to believe that Africa destroyed, nearly wiped out by this Mount Toba eruption. They then just decide to leave. Like when everything kind of calms down and life begins to be normal again, instead of spreading into the areas that are now unpopulated.
And fertile, obviously, from all that ash and everything else.
Instead of moving north and they decide to go to Australia.
Yeah, crossing a vast ocean. Doesn't make sense.
Doesn't really make sense. So they have an issue with that. But really, I think the Y chromosome stuff is really interesting. Like if you look
That's the most compelling.
Again, if you look at these latest studies that have been done where they're not finding a solitary African chromosome abroad in these non-African study samples, the researchers are essentially saying that Adam can't be in Africa. The Adam and Eve. Adam cannot be found in Africa. It just doesn't fit the data. The original genetic coding, they say, should be saturated with African mtDNA and Y chromosomes, but that's just simply not the case. So moving on, they say the genetic nail in the coffin is this extensive genetic research that was just completed in maybe mid-2015 in the States. The scientist is David Reich. He's the senior author of the paper and a professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School. And he openly admitted that the results they got were incredibly surprising. He had no reason to doubt the current theories that account for migration into America. And the current theory is basically one racial group about 15,000 years ago started to populate America. And he said, look, I've been a proponent that most Native Americans today extend from a single pulse of expansion south of the ice sheets. And that's wrong, he said. We missed something very important in the original data. So he starts talking about the Tupi-speaking Suri people, the Karitana people, the Gi-speaking Savante people of the Amazon. They all have a genetic ancestor more closely related to Indigenous Australians than to any other population in the world. That's what their data showed. The comparison was extensive and included the genomes of people from about 200 non-American populations. They conceded that they, quote, don't know the order, the time, the separation, or the geographical patterns, and that a more diverse set of founding populations of the Americas than previously accepted should be considered. So even our understanding of people coming into the Americas is...
It's wrong.
It's wrong. It needs to be totally rethought. And they're finding connections to Aboriginal Australians in their DNA. It's kind of weird.
That's the most compelling part, though, because it's the DNA which is providing, it's yielding these results. And that's what's important. But the problem is we just don't know where to go from here, I think.
And again, the locations that they're finding connections to from these indigenous tribes in North America and South America are Australians, New Guineans, and Andaman Island people.
Where's that? Off the coast of Australia?
First of all, Papua New Guinea was part of Australia only up to 8,000 years ago. Like there was a bridge connecting them. Mm-hmm. So you can just consider that the same homogenous racial group.
And that's what we were taught in school as well, by the way, that there was a land bridge there, and that's where a lot of the Australian Aboriginals came from, down through that land bridge.
So they're not separate people. That's just one people. And Andaman Islands is interesting because that's where Sentinel Island is.
Oh.
The
Sentinelese.
The natives that will just kill anyone that tries to contact them, no matter what their purpose is, no matter how many Bibles they're holding in their canoe, you will get killed.
Well, wasn't a journalist killed on... Oh, no, actually it was a missionary.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, right. Yeah, only recently, like last year or so.
Yeah, he went there to convert them.
Yeah, that Bible's not going to help you.
He had the latest King James, and he thought, I'm going to convert these savages. And
they throw spears at helicopters.
He got a bunch of arrows in the chest. They're genetically connected as well, and they're very closely related to native Australians.
How did they get genetic samples?
I don't know.
Should have darted them.
The Andaman Islands has other people of the same racial group.
Right, I see. Yep, okay.
So
that makes sense.
It's just interesting that that's connected. So this info was already suspected by archaeologists, though. They kind of knew this. It's like the DNA was just the icing on the cake, right?
Yeah.
So Walter Neves, he researched 55 skulls found in Brazil. He said, this discovery is striking in light of interpretations of the morphology of some early Native American skeletons, which some authors suggested have affinities to Australasian groups. So the very first Native Americans were basically Australian Aboriginals, according to the archaeology. So this is the thing. No matter which way you look at this, the age of Homo sapiens sapiens just keeps getting pushed back further and further and further. They quote the work of Dr. Virginia Steen McIntyre. She's identified 6 different locations in South America where human occupation has occurred between 33,000 years ago and 1.3 million years ago.
How can humanity go back that far?
You remember when we got taught this, that Homo sapiens sapiens were basically forked off 200,000 years ago.
Exactly. Yes,
like that
that's
was the law.
That was it. Yeah, and that was really drummed into you as well.
That was well understood. You know, this is conclusively shown. We've got the evidence for it. Nope, sorry, you're wrong. 1.3 million years. And why should it stop there? So one site, Lake Valsequillo, it's got, they say that this area in particular and the work they've done on what they've found there has completely destroyed careers. It's polarized opinions. Friendships have been torn up. Like
Funding's been cancelled.
It is just really controversial. So this site, it clearly showed, and I can't remember what country it's in, but it's in South America. Maybe it's Brazil. They clearly showed that Homo sapiens sapiens were in America at least 250,000 years ago from this site.
So at least 50,000 years beyond what we've been told.
Yeah, so there's more from Chris Stringer as well. This guy's really interesting because he just doesn't kind of package what he's found in some politically correct way. He just says, look, this is the data and we need to rethink everything. There was a recent announcement from him at the 5th annual meeting of the European Society of Human Evolution, and it's shaken the hominid family tree to its very core, say the Strongs. There is a universally accepted pivotal separation between all hominids and Homo sapiens from a common ancestor of ours, you know, a long time ago. And essentially what this means is that the sapiens offshoot continues down a different path for us as it did with Neanderthals, as it did with Denisovans, the Red Deer cave people, whoever they are, and other strands of humans.
So humanity, or Homo sapiens sapiens, are the ones that became the dominant species.
That's right. And there were all these different splits. And the archaeological evidence we had suggested this occurred about 180 to 200,000 years ago. So that's where that date comes from. That's why we used to get taught it was 200,000 years ago that modern humans kind of forked off, right?
Yeah.
And that's been the law. And Africa was the perfect fit for the archaeological evidence that we have, but not anymore. So DNA extracted from fossils in Spain showing an age of 300,000 to 400,000 years old, and the hominid was a relative to Neanderthals. So what this showed was that no less than 300,000 years ago, this so-called parting of the ways of sapiens hadn't happened. So that 200,000 date doesn't stick anymore. It just doesn't stick. The date of separation must be older. And this is the minimum estimate, like 300,000 years ago. Now we've pushed it back 100K already.
Do they have a theory on just how far back it goes? I mean, I know we've gone back as far as 1.3 million years. Are they suggesting that it could go back even further?
Well, again, you can only guess unless you find a fossil.
Yeah.
You can only guess. So the presence of that one semi-Neanderthal in Spain, they say it automatically disqualifies the credentials of the accepted genesis of modern humanity in Africa beginning 200,000 years ago. As I said, that theory is dead. He said if the timing is unclear, logically the place where modern humans first appeared is no less uncertain and warrants a new debate. Stringer went on to say that means that the ancestors of modern humans also had to split earlier than expected from the population that gave rise to Neanderthals and Denisovans, who were more closely related to each other than they were to modern humans. This would mean that the ancestors of humans were already wandering down a solitary path apart from other archaic humans on the planet, 100,000 to 400,000 years earlier than expected. So to answer your question, we can at least push it back now 500,000 years that Homo sapiens sapiens were a separate species.
No wonder this is so controversial, though.
So, this is a huge shakeup. And Stringer, to his credit, this guy essentially conceded that the agreed historical narrative, this out of Africa theory from 200,000 years ago, is now proven to be wrong. And he said, quote, "There's no alternative but to engage in a new debate about when and where the branches belong." So this is where the Strongs come in and say, hey guys, hey, we've got the answer. It was never out of Africa. It is, in fact, out of Australia.
I wonder why you were playing that today. Now I understand.
Thanks, Australian Aboriginals, for being the progenitors of everything, according to the Strongs. So this is where it gets interesting, because they put forward this question. If the Australian native Aboriginal people...
Well, he calls them original Australians.
Yeah, he actually calls them original people. And I think it's just confusing to say that. So I'm just going to say Australian Aboriginals. If they were the seeders of essentially the entire genetics of modern humans, if they really are our ultimate ancestors as Homo sapiens sapiens, and they went out and spread across the earth seeding their DNA, what else did they seed? What else did they spread across the world? And the Strongs say everything. Absolutely everything. And this is where what they present gets a little bit hard to believe. So they claim that not only Homo sapiens sapiens genes were spread by Aboriginal Australians, but culture, art, sailing, astronomy, spirituality, democracy, gender equality,
hieroglyphics,
dance, music, surgery, philosophy, language, technology, the internet, Twitter, YouTube, all created by Aboriginal Australians. Boom. Well, not the last four, but that's their point. Everything was spread forth by this ancient advanced culture of Aboriginal Australians.
Well, if they are the progenitors of humanity, well, then of course, yes, then everything else would come with them. So I can see why he's making that claim, but backing it up, how does he back it up?
Okay, good question. So this is where we get to the new skulls, these skulls that he's found. And of course, these have been discovered in Australia. And they suggest that a new species was in our country alongside these native Australians. And we're going to find out what the capabilities of that undiscovered species were after the break. You're listening to Mysterious Universe. Stay with us. Today's episode is brought to you by Squarespace. They make it easier than ever to launch your passion project, whether you're looking to start a new business, showcase your work, publish content, sell products and more. Squarespace is the tool for you.
I think for some people, Ben, when they think about creating a website, because in the past it's just been so difficult and there's so many things that you have to do, people feel a little bit overwhelmed. But with Squarespace, it's this all-in-one platform that basically takes care of everything for you. All you have to do is just pick from those fantastic designs.
Well, you get to drag and drop. You get all the fun stuff.
Exactly. You don't have to worry about coding in the back end or worrying about anything else. And they've got this powerful e-commerce functionality. So basically, if you want to sell anything, you can do it through Squarespace. I'll help you set up the website. Everything's optimized for mobile right out of the box, and there's nothing to patch or upgrade ever. You don't have to think about it.
Get your own custom domain through them as well. You got that 24/7 award-winning customer support. That's why Squarespace is so popular and so powerful. It empowers millions of people, from designers to lawyers, artists to gamers, even restaurants and gyms. You can turn your great ideas into something real with Squarespace. Head to squarespace.com/MU for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use the offer code MU to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. That's squarespace.com/MU, offer code MU.
AMC Network Shudder is a premium video streaming service serving fans with the best selection of horror and thrillers. With the largest, fastest-growing human-curated selection of thrillers and dangerous entertainment, Shudder is like the Netflix for horror.
Stream great thrillers, horror and suspense for $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year on all your favorite devices like iPhone, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, and Android devices. There are new spine-tingling thrillers, shocking horrors, and edge-of-your-seat suspense added weekly, and you'll have unlimited access to stream them all ad-free. Shudder has an unparalleled collection of exclusive and original films and series, horror classics, and blockbuster hits.
What's on there at the moment, Ben? You mentioned a movie that I should see.
Oh, Predestination.
What's that?
2015, Ethan Hawke. It's got lots of time travel and paradoxes and a M. Night Shyamalan style twist at the end.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, it's really good. And they got good stuff on here. Like they've got a large selection of old and new, which is really good.
That's the thing. The new stuff is great, but there's just something about those really old horror films. I mean, the special effects are bad and tacky, but it just seems to add to the weirdness and the suspense of those movies.
Heaps of spaghetti sauce blood.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, really good stuff.
That's what you want.
Look, to try Shudder for free for 30 days, go to shudder.com and make sure you use the promo code UNIVERSE. That's SHUDDER.com. Use the promo code UNIVERSE and you'll get Shudder for 30 days for free.
We're back on Mysterious Universe, talking about Stephen and Evan Strong's recent world-exclusive reveal of a reconstructed skull, possibly of a new species on planet Earth. Their website is forgottenorigin.com. Of course, we'll link to everything they do in the show notes at mysteriousuniverse.org. And essentially, we just finished on their claim that Native Australian Aboriginal people had essentially seeded the entire world's culture. They are the progenitor race, not just in terms of DNA, but culture. So getting back to the notes from the talk, this is where I'll leave their book behind. And again, there'll be a link in the show notes if you want to check it out for yourself. But essentially, humans like us were walking around in Europe 700,000 years ago. Apparently, this is new information on the academic scene. The whole story of human origins has completely changed in academia in the last 10 years, but it hasn't penetrated mainstream knowledge. Again, if you ask anyone on the street, where did humans evolve from, they'll say Africa.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
He has more quotes from Springer. And again, these aren't entirely accurate because I'm just going from my notes here, but apparently he said there's only one race in the world that has Denisovan DNA, and that's Aboriginals. But Denisovans never came to Australia. They were just strictly based in Europe. So how do Native Australians have their DNA?
So obviously there has to be a
unless
previous species.
The only way it would make sense is if Native Australians were before them.
Right, of course, yeah.
So he claims new research has shown that Neanderthals were much more advanced than we assumed as well. He claims they had settlements with plumbing and piped hot water.
That's right, yes.
I love that. The Neanderthals just had apartments and,
Well, this is the thing. Like, if you were going to do the 23andMe study, for example, it will tell you how much Neanderthal DNA you have. And people go, oh, Neanderthals, you're a dumbass. No, actually, if you have a higher level of Neanderthal DNA, you're actually more likely to be more intelligent.
Yeah, this is something that they kept on drumming into the audience in their presentation, is that a larger cranial capacity was something that featured with the human ancestors.
Let's talk about that.
And they claim that means higher intelligence and higher culture.
That's the thing. So you and I walked out of there because, okay, so basically the way that we got to this point about talking about these skulls, or this particular skull, is that Stephen said about a year ago he was just given this skull. And at first he thought it was this bound skull. But then he realized that, no, this thing was slightly different because it had very wide eyes. In fact, the eyes were 46% bigger than humans. On top of that, the skull capacity, like the capacity of where the brain would sit, was significantly larger. Now, he kind of basically inferred that because it had a larger capacity, that it had a significantly higher intelligence. But we know that that's not the case. Well, not about that, but we know that just because your brain is larger, it doesn't mean that you're smarter. It's actually because of an increase in efficiency that the human mind, the brain, the actual brain mass has become smaller because those pathways and everything has become more efficient.
And this is the thing. This is where their presentations, where they're quoting academics, are great. But then you start to realize that they make some connections and overstate some things that are very misleading. For example, we just mentioned that they put up this information that Neanderthals had running water and plumbing and
hot water,
heating.
piping hot water.
I looked this up, and I'm sure they're referencing a 2015 Smithsonian article where researchers from the Catalan Institute of Human Paleoecology were investigating this 60,000-year-old cave in Barcelona. And essentially, the piping hot plumbing was a hole in the cave that they heated with a fire.
Oh, so I'm thinking copper pipes and...
No, it was literally a hole in the ground.
But then where was the water?
The piping water and the Roman pipes and the Neanderthals having showers.
That's what I'm imagining.
It's bullshit.
Oh.
It's not true.
Okay, so
They've just taken this article that says, let me read it for you. Archaeologists uncovered what they think is a hole located near the hearths that could have been used to heat water.
Oh, so it's not piping hot water.
It's literally a hole near a fire. That's it. The remains also show evidence of sleeping areas, trash disposal areas. Oh, so they had a place in the cave where they put all their shit.
I just get this. I don't know why, but when he said that, I just got this image of like Neanderthal home flippers and them going in and like renovating homes and, putting in new tiles.
Yeah. So we're going to take out this wall, and Grug, you're going to put a kitchen in there. And Gonk Gonk, you're going to install the shower. And over here is where we'll fling our shit.
I don't know why. That was in my mind.
What's really happening is they're like... And that's actually, they had stone tools. They had this area for slaughtering animals. So at the very least,
they didn't shit where they slept.
That's it. They had a cave where they did different things in different sections. And from that article, he says in the presentation that they had plumbing and piped hot water. No.
But we will begin to find that a number of things are not entirely accurate throughout the day.
So you started mentioning the skulls, and this is actually really interesting. When he first found this skull, I had in my notes that he thought it must have been bound.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah, it was a bound skull.
He didn't really take it seriously because it must have maybe an infant,
so flat.
An infant that had their head wrapped. And by the way, we'll have a photo of this skull in the show notes if you want to take a look. And there's multiple skulls as well. So the thing that makes the skull really weird, I don't know if you just mentioned this, but the eye sockets are huge.
Yes, yeah, they're 46% bigger.
And this means, according to the Strongs, it must have been a nocturnal creature. It must have been a nocturnal being. And also,
you would have gone blind if you were out in normal daylight.
Yeah, and they are really huge. I looked up all the other hominid skulls. There's a place that sells recreations of them, and I wanted to compare the eye socket size to, what's the Homo pithecus and
Australopithecus and
all those ancient
Homo
ones,
habilis.
Right? Yeah, and it's huge. Like the eye sockets
they are massive
compared to those ancient skulls. Also, what's weird is the front two teeth look like they've been pulled out. And Stephen mentioned that this was apparently still an Aboriginal burial ceremony when the first white settlers arrived in Australia.
When Cook arrived.
So there's some kind of cultural link between Australians and this new species. And also the shape is odd, like the slant of the skull doesn't really make sense. Now, it gets really strange when he pointed out that they found a humerus bone. It was 45 centimeters long.
Humans are around 32.
Yeah, and the average for a 6-foot-tall man is having a 30-centimeter long humerus.
Yeah.
So it's got massive arms that hang around its ankles. It would essentially be the longest arms on the planet.
But he also said, and this is something I find to be very difficult to believe, that the diameter of the wrist would have been 1 inch.
So their arms?
So that's 2.5 centimeters, Ben. So you and I have got about 7 or 8 inch wrists. That's how small it would be. Could you imagine? Because I was thinking about it this morning as I was going over my notes. And I'm like, hang on, 1-inch wrist.
So this thing...
Oh, I'm sorry, not diameter, around.
Yeah.
So that's around. Like, that's
so
tiny.
Like a dime.
Yes. Oh, even smaller.
So this thing would have had giant, like, night possum eyes.
Yes,
like
and
huge...
1 cent, actually. It'd be like penny wrists.
And its arms would literally be Grover arms from Sesame Street.
Yes. Yep, that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
He's got Grover arms.
Yeah.
So what the hell is this thing?
Oh, and you didn't point out, though, he also said that the skull itself, it didn't have suture marks in the back of the skull. So whoever gave birth to it pushed it out completely. So
was that skull or one of the other skulls?
It was that skull, wasn't it? It didn't have any sutures.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the problem...
So the head shape wouldn't have changed over time. It's basically like that's what you get when you come out.
When a baby's born, the plates kind of go over each other when they go through the birth canal. That's a good thing, by the way. And then as the child grows up and ages, they kind of fuse together.
So almost you could say it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to naturally give birth to this being.
Well, for human beings.
Interesting.
And you can see where we're heading.
So there was a second skull. And it's buried with this first weird skull. And the second skull is from a completely different species. So why is there a burial site? This is like finding a burial mound with modern humans and Neanderthals buried together.
Yeah, well, species that should be hundreds of thousands of years separate.
Yeah, and obviously completely different in culture, but they're living together.
Yeah.
It's weird. The skull had... Oh, no sutures. Yeah, you mentioned that. The teeth were completely different to ours as well on this skull. The roots
I apologize. I must have mixed it up. So
who knows? This is notes from 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Okay, so the bottom, and you just hinted at this, the bottom line is that it's not human.
Yeah.
The skull is not human. Now, there's a new skull. There was a third skull found, and this is interesting. Because Stephen got a call to go and check out this new skull. It was he won't reveal where it was or who the person was. He's trying to keep their privacy, but essentially he's called out to go and see this skull, and he doesn't tell anyone that he's going to inspect it.
Was this the same skull that had the teeth? So with the teeth, when they looked at it, the teeth flared outwards instead of inwards. So when you've got a molar, when it comes out, the root is supposed to move inwards.
I can't remember.
But that one, he showed an image of the teeth flaring out. Yet again, suggesting that this is not a Homo sapiens.
Whatever it was, they needed braces because their face would be a mess.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. Yeah, it was, well.
So this new skull, off he goes. He doesn't tell anyone that he's going to inspect this. And while he's driving hours and hours to get to the location where they've found this specimen, he gets a call from one of his mysterious elders. And Stephen Strong makes a reference to the elders in this way that they're almost like grand wizards that know all. These elders that he's in contact with.
Well, it's beyond that, Ben. I think that he actually does directly suggest that they have some type of psychic abilities. He doesn't go so far as to say the word psychic, but that's what I kept on picking up.
Well, it's almost like just saying that they're elder Australian Aboriginals implies that they already have grand wisdom beyond everyone else.
Yes.
Which I find I've mentioned this before.
It's like with the American Indians.
Yeah, it's so dumb.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know who this guy is. He's an elder. Okay, he's old. So what?
He could just be some old Aboriginal guy. It's like, I've got powers.
So what if he's an elder? But anyway, this elder calls him on his phone. And he says, "You're going to see a skull, aren't you, mate?"
Very good interpretation, Ben. Very well done.
Stephen's like, how do you know that, Grand Elder? I haven't told anyone this information. And he admits, like, yeah, I'm going to go see these skulls. And the elder says over the phone that these skulls he's going to see are the sons of Biame. Now, Biame is a creator god in ancient Aboriginal history, in ancient Aboriginal culture. Now, it's spelt B-I-A-M-E. And Aaron, I want you to do a Google image search for Biame right now and tell me if you notice anything interesting about this ancient cave painting of Biame.
Fascinating. So there's two things that really stick out. One, massive eyes.
Yes.
And two, very long arms.
The arms are ridiculously long.
And what looks like a large penis.
The penis is huge. It's a tripod being Biame. But that matches everything he's shown that appears with this new skull they've found. It And this elder has just called out of the blue and said, these are the sons of Biame you found, these skulls.
I'll put this photograph in the show notes so you can see it for yourself. It's fascinating.
It's kind of uncanny that it matches a native Australian god being. So again, make sure you take a look at this, or just Google image search Biame, B-I-A-M-E.
But the thing is, very naturally, this suggests that whoever painted this saw it.
Well, at least they knew the description.
Yes.
So I just did a bit of research on Biame, one of the great Guri ancestral beings of the creation period in Aboriginal lore.
But then they find a skull that matches the dimensions and femur.
During the creation period, he moved across the land, helping develop the landscape. So he's doing terraforming, and he's giving life and lore to man. So it's like he's Quetzalcoatl. It's like he's one of the
very similar story.
Progenitor gods. And when his journey was complete, Biame returned to the sky, but appears at different times to remind the Guri peoples of the lore. Now, I didn't pull that from Stephen and Evan Strong's website. That is the actual native Australian creation myth that's been passed down for thousands of years, that he returned to the stars, that he came and helped create mankind and all life and terraform the earth.
So again, though, it's kind of another star person story.
Yeah. And again, look how big his damn eyes are.
Yeah, it matches with what the skull looks like.
So more information on the skulls. Apparently the one that the weird Biame skull was buried with had a knob on the back that Neanderthals have. So from that information, they figured out that this Biame sun god alien being was buried with a Neanderthal. So it's not even...
It's not even a Homo sapien.
That doesn't even make sense. All of this doesn't make sense.
But this is where he started then going into the skull capacities. And this is the point he goes, well, these skull capacities are 1600 cc. Today we're 1300 cc. We've been dumbed down by something. And I was like, well, but dumbed down by what?
And also the son of Biame skull with the huge eyes and the really long arms, the bone structure is incredibly thick. Like if Mike Tyson went up and punched this guy in the head, he would break his hand. And he also mentioned that each skull was painted with ochre paint on the inside. So it's like it had been treated with a traditional Australian cultural burial. So what the hell is going on? And of course, their answer is, it's an alien. It's not a new human being. It's an alien skull, this Biame skull. The other weird thing, and if you look at the photo in the show notes, look at the nose and where the actual nose starts on the skull. It almost reaches the skull's, I guess you could say, third eye position in between the two eyebrows.
Yes.
Which is incredibly high. Like, look at any ancient hominid skull, even look at a monkey skull, and you don't see the nose kind of opening there go so high on the face of the skull. It is totally, it's totally different to anything we would see.
Yeah, it's almost to the top of the forehead.
Yeah.
Which is just really unusual.
So that in itself is absolutely bizarre.
So at this point, but I'm just going through my notes here and I'm just looking back. Now, I recall this particular incident grabbed me, but Stephen said, look, this has been the story of this skull, is that he arrived back in Sydney and for a few weeks he started feeling really unwell.
Yeah, so this is where we're about to do a 180 turn and go to somewhere fun.
So refresh my memory, because obviously he got the skull.
Yeah, so remember he was called out to go and just look at the skull. And as soon as he saw it, he knew that, okay, this is something incredible. I've got to gather up all this and take it back with me to Sydney. He said it was a huge drive because he obviously wasn't going to fly with it. It was hours and hours and hours in the car. And
can I point out as well that by this point, I began to notice that he'd started referring to himself as us black fellas and you white fellas.
Yeah, I don't know if he's done this before.
I can't recall.
He's clearly not Aboriginal.
We shouldn't say that because, I mean, his skin colour, he may have Aboriginal DNA or ancestry.
So what? What is it, 1%?
Look, yeah, I mean,
that's like me saying,
pretty white.
That's like me saying I have 4% Neanderthal. I'm a Neanderthal. They're my people.
Yeah, exactly. I've got 6% Neanderthal. Right, but I'm not Neanderthal.
The reason it stood out to us is because I can't remember him doing this before. Like, all of a sudden through this talk, he's referring to himself
as a black fella.
A black fella.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, what are you doing?
Which is a term that you can only use if you are a black fella. You can't say I'm a black fella unless you really are.
And his son is whiter than you, Aaron. It's like, well, is his son Aboriginal as well?
Well, it would
What is
have to
going
be.
on?
Yeah, it was strange. I'm like, is this... Well, the only thing I could think of, though, and I know this because my father was involved in some Aboriginal groups before I was born, and my father is white as a sheet as well. But he got involved in this group. He was actually screwing one of the young ladies that was there. And he all of a sudden was a black fella.
Right.
Because he was like brought into the tribe and into the group. So I'm wondering, and I'm not saying that Stephen Strong is doing anything that's nefarious or horrible, but maybe he's been working with the Aboriginal people so much that it's like a respect thing.
So it's like a Rachel Dolezal thing where he's
No, I'm not saying
he's identifying himself as Aboriginal, but
perhaps.
actually there's no genetic basis to
Yes.
it. I mean, I don't know.
Maybe the group has taken him in as Aboriginal.
Maybe the percentage of Aboriginal DNA he has is very high, and he's making those claims legitimately. But just looking at the guy, it's hard to say that.
Look, I know in Australia, I think to claim benefits as an Aboriginal person or something like that, not that this is a good marker at all, but you've got to be 16%, your DNA has to be at least 16% Aboriginal to be able to claim, Aboriginal benefits and whatever else. So maybe that's, where he's... But I actually think this is probably because he interacts with them so much and he's out on their lands that he's probably taken himself or they've taken him into the group, which is fine, but it was just odd.
It's misleading to say that.
It was a bit misleading in a way.
You're saying you're another race that you're not.
True. Yeah.
It's lying.
Yeah, it was a bit...
Sorry.
It was a bit off-putting, I must say, because he kept on doing it. And he kept on like, us black fellas know so much more. I'm like, but hang on, you're creating kind of this divide. And I wasn't sure if...
It's just weird because we've seen him speak a bunch of times. He's been on the show. And I can't remember. We have got to go back and listen because I can't remember if he did the same thing years ago. It's like
I don't recall.
Feels like it's a change all of a sudden. But anyway, that's beside the point. He's driving back with these skulls, right? And when he gets back to Sydney, as you said, he's bedridden with just the most horrific illness. Like he is just completely wiped out for 2 months. I mean, he made it sound like he was pretty much on his deathbed.
Well, it sounded like an extreme version of chronic fatigue syndrome or something. And he pointed out that he's never been sick. He's never even had a serious cold. So for him to come down with this illness, it was just bizarre. It was completely strange.
So he calls in some psychics and his mysterious elder friends.
And an acupuncturist.
And they all say the same thing. They tell him why he's been so sick for so long. They tell him that the skull is from the Pleiades. And the elders say the Pleiadians were called to Earth millions of years ago by the tree people. We shall create tree people.
You should have actually prepared one of those.
Now, the reason the Pleiadians were called in by the tree people is because they were under attack from the reptilians.
Well, the reptilians apparently were already here. They'd taken over the planet. They were cutting trees down. There was pollution everywhere.
Yeah.
There was big problems.
So I think we've actually described this story from them before, but every time we hear it, we're just like, what? So basically, the tree people call them in. The reptilians see the Pleiadians arrive. The Pleiadians are like, okay, evil Nazi reptilians, you must stop all this hate. And the reptilians are like,
yeah.
And the Pleiadian ship is destroyed instantly. And a few escape pods jettison out, and one escape pod lands safely in Australia, and one Pleiadian survives. Now, he lives with the original people, the native Australians. They kind of take him in, but they protect him because roving bands of Gestapo reptilians are on the hunt for this one surviving Pleiadian. So essentially, the Australian Aboriginals, they hide this Pleiadian in their basement. So he becomes like a Pleiadian Anne Frank, trying to avoid these reptilian roving bands. And the thing is, this Pleiadian Anne Frank that was hiding in the Aboriginal basements a million years ago was betrayed
by Space Judas.
Well, it's not Space Judas. He was betrayed by one of the Aboriginal people. So the question is, who was this Aboriginal Judas? Who was the betrayer that turned in Pleiadian Anne Frank to the Gestapo reptilians?
Well, the elders had the answer, apparently.
It was none other than Stephen Strong himself. That's right. In a past life, In an ancient past life, Stephen Strong betrayed the Pleiadian Anne Frank and handed her in for a handful of Draco credits or something.
So once Stephen came across this skull, the skull recognized him as Space Judas and then put an inferno inside his body.
He was meant to die to pay for his past life sins.
I like it, though, how he kind of just fleshes over this and just goes, oh, well, we made good and we're all good and then I was fine.
He doesn't explain how he redeemed himself.
No. I'm like, you're essentially Space Judas in a previous lifetime.
Yeah.
And you turned Anne Frank over to the Nazis.
So at this point, he kind of just drops the mic and walks off stage, and the crowd's like, what's going on? And
this is where it did get, I'm like, what's going on?
I wrote that the old woman next to you nearly lost her dentures in a fourth glass of bourbon by this stage. She's like, what? And out of nowhere, we're introduced to a new speaker. We don't get any background, really.
We don't even get a name.
Well, her name's Leah.
Yeah, but that's it. We don't get a surname.
Oh, yeah, so we can't look her up or anything. And she's a contactee.
But she's wearing a suit. And I'm like, what?
Oh, no, she was very presentable.
Oh, no, don't get me wrong.
Very attractive, early 20s young woman.
This is what I'm saying. I'm saying she's wearing a suit. She's all kind of dressed dolled up. And so the last thing I expected to come out of her mouth was rambling, crazy madness.
So she gets up. She claims she's actually been in contact with aliens for 20 years, since she was 6 years old. She's contacted many beings, and she starts just listing them off. She's like, I've contacted arachnids and transparent ones. I've contacted the Pleiadians. I've contacted the Greys. I've contacted the Redskins. And I'm like, what?
See, people think you're joking, but I actually saw in your notes that you're putting in images of Native Americans. Like, great. That's great.
She's made a lot of friendships along the way, she says. And
through genetic and mental interfacing is what I wrote in my
and notes. These beings have been with her through thick and thin. So we're just like, all right, we don't know what this has to do with anything we've heard so far, but let's keep listening.
But she says she's never seen them until she was shown the skulls.
Yes.
So were the skulls like some type of trigger?
Well, I'll get to that. She reveals the following. Humans are not the only beings who have lived on this planet in history.
Mm-hmm.
ETs have been here for millions of years. And as you were just saying, she had never seen these Pleiadian beings who were called in by the tree people a million years ago and blasted by the reptilians until she had seen one of the skulls. Now, she's up on stage and she says, look, after I saw the skulls, my friend Mesrith, who's basically her ET boyfriend, he explained to her who these Pleiadians were. Now, Mesrith is a 1,000-year-old Nebasaurs.
He's also non-physical.
At this stage, we're like, what is a Nebasaurus? No one asks this question. Everyone's like, all right.
Yeah, great. Oh, the Nebasaurians. Yeah, I know them.
Oh, yeah, Nebasaurians.
Yeah.
So Mesrith, the 1,000-year-old transparent Nebasaurus, he tells this contactee, Leah, that he grew up on the, of course, Nebasaurus homeworld. And he said these Pleiadian beings, they're just from the Pleiadian system, which is where his homeworld is. They also grew up on the same planet. So they were kind of like bros. Except he said that the Nebasauruses were on the plains, but the Pleiadian beings were on the hillside. So
I must have missed that.
There's a bit of racial segregation going on the Nebasaurus homeworld.
But all that kind of stuff starts to become more apparent through this discussion through the day as well. It was rather unusual.
Oh, everything. Dude, at this point, we were just like, okay, this is great. This is the best content so far. He basically said these Pleiadian beings, and I'm talking about the beings with the skull, like the large giant eyes, the crazy long arms. They went into space. Like they became a spacefaring people. They left the Nebasaurian homeworld, which was also their homeworld, and they spent vast amounts of time traveling through galaxies and just being
nomads.
Yeah, but helpful.
Yeah.
Like they would turn up and say, reptilians, no, that's problematic. You can't do that. And
they get blown,
then they'll
blasted
get destroyed.
Out of the sky.
But she basically says after a vast amount of time, the Pleiadian beings were like, meh, we don't really want to do this anymore. And they retired from space travel. They basically went to their equivalent of Florida And that's where they've been for thousands of years. They only come out now when there's a grave danger or the tree people of some forest moon call you because the reptilians are in town.
Right. So she said many past lives come from this location, though. And feelings are that the world is pessimistic and things are not as good. She's like, it's not as bad, but it's not as good. And she's then asking Mesrith who he is and what his species is. He's like, names are not important.
Yet. Details matter not when I am telling you truth.
And then she sits down.
And that's it.
And I'm like, what the hell has just happened?
What the hell is going on? Why are you even here?
What relevance did that have to any of this?
It's funny because, Stephen had just told this insane story that in a past life he had betrayed Pleiadian Anne Frank. And she's introduced as some kind of verification of this story.
I know, but she doesn't say anything though that has any. Yeah. So, but where I now understand, at the point I didn't understand, but by the time we got to the end of the day, I did begin to understand what was going on. And I must say, I feel like there's an agenda now that hasn't existed before. And I don't want to speak badly of Evan and Stephen Strum because I like what they're doing. I like them going and looking for this stuff. I know you can
speak badly about this stuff.
But this stuff is just a little bit strange. So basically what she was essentially setting up is that humanity's a huge mess at the moment.
Yeah.
And they're coming back to fix this mess.
Yeah. And I like how we were meant to be just slightly skeptical of Stephen's story. But when she mentioned the verification from the Nebasaurs, we were meant to go, oh, okay.
And then, of course, this is where, by the end of the day, huge amounts of money come in. But I'll get back to that in a moment. Because after she sits down, Stephen comes back and he says, well, the Pleiadians, we need to talk about them. And if we talk about the Pleiadians and this return, we need to talk about what is not only the most important site in Australia, but actually the most important site in the world. Now, we take a break for cheesecake. And you and I take a break, Ben. And I think you and I had a snack. And we come back and we sit down.
Now, important part to a later end to the evening is we went to lunch and I'd never drink coffee anymore because it ruins me. Like, it just ruins my insides. And you came and handed me a beverage and you're like, have this. It's a lovely drink. And I'm like, oh, this is coffee. And it's the biggest cup of coffee I've ever seen. It was like 2 liters of coffee.
With
because there was
5 shots in it.
I was so thirsty. I just smashed the whole thing. I thought, I'll deal with the consequences later, and I'll explain the consequences at the end of the show.
Even when I actually ordered the coffees, because I haven't been sleeping because my kids have been playing up, so I was really, really tired. So I asked for the largest coffee they have. Oh, could you put an extra shot? That is like, it's already got 5 shots. I'm like, that doesn't matter. So
there was 5 shots?
It's 6.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
And I just forgot that coffee isn't so good for you anymore, but it was fine. So regardless, though, we go back into, there's obviously a new serving at the Chinese restaurant. They've changed out the Bain Maries and there's more people in there. And we head back upstairs, back into this discussion. And we want to talk about the Standing Stone site. It's considered to be Australia's Stonehenge. And they start talking about this man, Frederick Slater. And Slater is essentially one of the first discoverers. I mean, even though it's been there for a long time, he's one of the people that started to understand what the importance of this site was. But essentially, and I think they might have mentioned this site in the past. I mean, they're saying it's this very sacred location. Stephen's done 2 days of archaeology at this spot, but apparently they got 20 volunteers and 10 elders went into the location to try and examine it, but it had been destroyed by a farmer during the Second World War. So the story goes is that the farmer had received a phone call from the government, it doesn't say which agency or department or whatever else, and said to the farmer, if you want to keep your land. So I got the impression at the start that they were saying that they were going to take his land off him if he didn't destroy the site and do their dirty work. But no, it wasn't that. What it was is that they were giving away land and this farmer was told, you can have this land if you destroy this site.
Oh, really?
So it's not really, it was kind of implied that he was being threatened to do it, but it was more, hey, if you want your land, if you want this land, you've got to destroy it. So I don't know if that makes a difference, but I just thought it was important that we discuss that. But anyway, so this farmer says to his son, Jack, okay, you have to go out there and you have to destroy this site. And that's exactly what he does. He goes out and he bulldozes this site. And so these rocks were sandstone, but this was igneous country. So for these strange rocks, it means that, and on top of that as well, this was a very different type of sandstone. They weighed tons, and there wouldn't have been a technology at the time that would have allowed them to have moved them.
This is essentially Australia's Stonehenge.
Absolutely. He says there's no percussion points in the rock, so they've been cut with what he says is an unknown technology. And there was 3,500 cubic meters of fill surrounding the site. And this is where all the sandstone and clay and everything had all been moved. But he says there's zero sandstone anywhere around for miles and miles and miles. So it suggests that a very advanced technology was used to develop this site. But anyway, so when the bulldozing of the site had taken place, apparently Jack, the farmer's son, had taken these rocks and had stacked them next to a dairy. And the farm was about 50 meters from the dairy, and all these rocks were stacked up. And apparently the rocks disappeared. Now, no one knows what happened to those rocks, but no one could have moved them easily. It wasn't like it was something that someone could have just come along.
Well, the suggestion is that the landowners, the farmers, they basically buried them somewhere to essentially cover up the evidence that they were there because they were worried about losing the land. I think the idea that there was some historic cultural site on their land, and if this was discovered, the government would take it.
Yes.
I think is a reasonable thing to suggest.
Absolutely.
It's like if you find some kind of native bones in your backyard, they're going to come and...
There is a process and procedures even today now. If you are, working on some land and you find bones or artifacts or anything else like that, I'm not too sure what they call this, the Aboriginal Cultural Council or something, but they will come and they will inspect the site to make sure that it's not Aboriginal remains, and which is good. I mean, you want that archaeology to be there. But I think there was also a bit of an impression here that the only people who had the earth-moving equipment was the Jacks. So unless it was them, it had to be someone else in a clandestine fashion. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Look, let's talk about the site itself, because the site truly is a fascinating location. It's apparently with the native Australians. There's we know about the Dreaming Time stories and the legends and the oral traditions, but they're all regional. It's all to specific tribes and regions. But this particular site is the only universal oral tradition. And so according to what Stephen was saying is that the Aboriginals actually used to take a sabbatical, and for each member, from each tribe.
You'd pick your greatest warrior and send them on a great journey.
This sabbatical that would take 10 years. They'd have to get there and then they would get back. But they would go to the site and perform this ceremony at each of the mounds and kind of moving around these pyramid-shaped rocks and these tall pillars. And then they would head back to their tribe, and that would be like this ritual that was practiced. But all of them would come to this site and do these rituals. And, you can understand that it's such an important, but it goes beyond being a cultural thing. There's a suggestion here that there's some type of energy associated with this site. There's some type of almost mystical power associated with it.
Well, remember when Stephen was explaining, he organised a bunch of researchers and colleagues to go out there and study the site, and they all flew in from Australia. And when they arrived at the site, which he hasn't really revealed where it is, but essentially he said to them, I'm sorry, guys, we can't go onto the site at all. You can't step foot on the site until we get permission from the spirits. And he essentially had to walk into the circle, and one of the elders was there and said, you need to get a sign. And so a hawk flies over and is like, hey, and he's like, oh, that's a sign, right? And the elder's like, no, mate. Another hawk flies over. He's like, oh, that's got to be a sign. Nope, sorry. Eventually, what was it? 12
or 12
yeah,
so
hawks.
Yeah.
He
in a
claims
figure of 8 motion.
Flying over the site, flying around in an infinity symbol. Mm-hmm. and that was
permission.
And then the elder's like, okay, you can do it now. So it's just like, imagine if you flew in from Perth and you arrive at this archaeological dig and the owner
I don't know if you can get in today.
Sorry, dude.
It's
spirits,
like the hardest nightclub in the world.
It is, yeah. You got to get permission from the spirits.
So anyway, he goes, once he's gotten into this location and he's seen this site, there was a lot more discussion about, and this is where he went into more of these details about how essentially there's stories that the Egyptians would want to attend this site as well. And this is where the links come in between the Egyptians and why we've got things like the glyphs, the Gosford glyphs and that kind of stuff. It's not Proto-Egyptian. What it actually is, it's Aboriginal or original Australians that taught the Egyptians.
Yeah, this is the claim that Egyptians did come to Australia, but they didn't leave their culture here. They learnt from native Australians.
So Stephen was saying that he met with Graham Hancock, and Graham Hancock and his wife, Santha, went to this sacred site, this location. And apparently, if you stand in the middle of this standing stone site and you look west, you can see 3 pyramids in the background. And he claims that these are, because they look like they're natural formations, but at one point they actually would have been pyramids that have now been covered over by, erosion or whatever else.
So this claim that native Australians can't have been that advanced because there's literally no evidence of it is wrong.
Is wrong.
Because there's some hills that are shaped like pyramids.
Pretty much, yes. Yes. And even Graham Hancock, apparently, according to Stephen, went, I can see the pyramids. So I don't know about that.
Just like the Neanderthals have running water and take hot water showers.
Yeah, I mean, it could just be 3 hills, for God's sake. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're pyramids. And you would think, though, that, well, if there are pyramids there, why aren't there archaeological excavations going on? But then, look, Stephen says at this point, with this sacred site, there's only one person in the entire country that is banned by the government from attending this site. And that is Stephen Strong. So it's like,
Yeah, so this idea that the Egyptians came to Australia, I think it's a shame that it's kind of linked in with some of this silliness because there's clearly a lot of evidence for it. And Stephen was saying before the 1960s, the suggestion of it wasn't considered odd at all. It was pretty much a known idea.
Well, there's all little things. It's like mummified children have been found in the Top End, so in the Northern Territory. And this is a mummification technique that was being utilized in Egypt in the 23rd dynasty. So, I mean, the fact that you've got the same mummification technique taking place on the opposite side of the world suggests that there's got to be a link somewhere.
And isn't there oral traditions that speak about these people coming and then being essentially chased off?
That's right. Yeah, essentially.
Killed.
Yeah, Stephen said that there's Aboriginal oral traditions that talk about the Egyptians coming to Australia and the Aboriginals saying that they don't want them here and actually spearing them.
Killing them all.
And telling them never to come back.
Because does that remind you of a high advanced culture or does that remind you of the Sentinelese people?
Yeah, it reminds me of the Sentinelese. Yeah, that's the thing. So this is the problem. I shouldn't say it's a problem, but I think that we tend to, and this is where the whole speech started to go. And I think it was kind of fitting in with some of the modern hysteria that we're having at the moment. And of course, things need to change and we do need to become a better society. But there's a lot of madness out there. The both ends of the spectrum are extremely extreme. And it was really that, the Aboriginal people are the most enlightened, beautiful, wonderful people that would never do any harm to anyone and they're being attacked. Yeah, exactly. And they're being backed by... Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that they're bad people. But all I'm saying is that there's this impression that this is this massive, amazing thing, this culture that's been suppressed and it's been helped by aliens. And if we don't do something to basically save it now, we're in a lot of trouble because they're coming back.
Yeah, this is what we'll go into after the break where this all comes to a point. The tip of the spear is the return of the gods.
Well, there's danger at this site now. And I agree. I don't think this site, whatever it is, whether it's what Stephen's saying it is, or it clearly is a sacred site and it should be protected. The problem is that apparently, according to Stephen, a subdivision is going in there and the 2 mounds that are there, that are these wonderful locations, are now actually having 465 houses built on top of them.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So the importance of the location is beyond what we can actually comprehend. While the archaeological importance is there, there's also a psychical and energy importance in that location as well, which I'll talk about in Plus. But
when we come back from Plus, we'll demonstrate their claims that connect this ancient Australian stone circle to Atlantis, to the return of the gods, and to a strange ring that Stephen himself was wearing during the talk, a sacred ring of power. And if you thought Pleiadian and Frank was weird, wait until you hear what's coming up after the break in Plus. Now, I will link to their work in the show notes. And again, I feel like we come to this place every time we cover their work. We end up with the same conclusion, that they're fantastic at gathering together, not obscure, but research that's academic research that's controversial, that's outside of, the average mainstream reader's perception. And they gather it together and they show what it means.
In a really clear and concise way as well.
Yeah, for example, all the genetic work on showing how out of Africa is being questioned seriously now, all that is fantastic work. I think they communicate this really well. The skulls they have are really interesting. Like if they are actual accurate recreations of real things they have, then they need to be studied seriously.
Absolutely. And they need to be, fit somewhere into the hierarchy as to what we understand about fossil records.
Some of the artifacts they have made out of metals that shouldn't have been able to be worked on.
That's right, alloys that shouldn't exist.
In Australia, thousands of years ago. And all that stuff is really fascinating. The evidence of Egyptian cultures making it to Australia, again, it's really important, and they communicate it so well. But again, every time we talk about the Strongs, we end up with insane stories of Pleiadian spaceships, reptilians, tree people.
Pleiadian cross-dressing.
Freaking Nebasauruses.
Yeah.
It's great. Like, I love it. I love that part of it.
No,
it's entertaining, but
I love it as well. But and this is the thing, I love the entertainment side. But part of me, I just see, the compelling argument they put forward, as you said, Ben, with all this evidence and all these details. I just go, this is incredible. Like this, no wonder these guys are being attacked by the government and are being shot down. But then when they have a woman stand up and says she hangs out with a guy called Mesrith, who is a Nebasaurian, who's 1,000 years old. It completely throws if any mainstream person, scientist, whatever else, was to sit down there, the moment that woman got up and they went, oh, by the way, I was a space Judas in a previous lifetime, it completely just destroys their argument in front of the scientific community. So they're not going to turn around and accept this stuff. And I think it's doing damage to them.
It is damaging. Yeah, it is damaging, especially if you've got all these important finds that need to be taken seriously. And then in the other breath, you're talking about all the insane stuff we just mentioned, and the even more insane stuff coming up in our Plus extension. Yeah, you'll realize that it's not helping their cause. It's not helping their case. And they want over $4 million to restore this Aboriginal stone circle.
Yes, which I will get into in the Plus extension as well. It's I can see to a point why they need that level of money, but not that kind of money. Where's the chorus?
This is the best part. Actually, I think I had this on, I created a loop where this just plays for like an hour, that loop. Yeah, I just have that looped. Sometimes I'll just play it in the studio to piss off Aaron.
Yes, I know you do.
The treaty loop. You can find Stephen and Evan Strong at forgottenorigin.com. They've got their latest book there, Between a Rock and a Hard Place.
Oh, and also in the Plus extension, find out why all CEOs are going to be obliterated.
That's right. Find out why the gods are returning and what will happen to you if you're a CEO and you're not an ally of the right people. You will be obliterated by the space people. That's coming up on our Plus extension, along with the cousins of the Burbalangs.
Yes.
Do they disembowel as well?
No, they don't. They're far more kinder, apparently, but they still snatch children.
Okay, they're much better.
So they're not great. All right, it's not brilliant.
They won't disembowel you, but they will steal your baby. That's coming up in our Plus extension for our last extension of Season 21. You can find that at mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. All the details are there. You get the big extensions at the end of these shows every single week. And you get an entirely exclusive season of Plus shows that come out on Tuesdays. mysteriousuniverse.org/plus for all the details. $9 a month. Help support your favorite show. You know the drill. You also get a high bitrate feed, blah, blah, blah. Discounts and blah, blah. I don't care.
Yeah, but we need to move. It's like this office is a complete mess. Just sign up and just let us move.
Just sign up so we can pay for our incredibly expensive shipping container studio.
That's been painful. That really has been hard. But we do it so that you guys get to hear us so we don't have noises coming through.
Oh, it's going to be great when we get in there. And again, just a reminder that we're taking a week off for our mid-year break. We'll be back with Plus on July the 2nd, but we'll be back with our regular MU show on Friday on July the 5th. That's a wrap for this show. If you're a free listener, if you're on Plus, stick around for the amazing Ring of Power after the break. For everyone else, we'll catch you in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening. Welcome back to your Plus extension. Great to have you with us.